Welcome, sleepwalkers. I am your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. When I was younger, I never thought friendships could truly die. I believed that once you bonded with someone, truly bonded, that thread stayed tied. No matter how many years passed, no matter how much distance came between you. That was why, when Arjun appeared at my door after nearly 15 years, I felt both joy and unease all at once. I was 32 then, living alone in a quiet part of town. My life was ordinary. Long office hours, coffee runs, and weekends where I tried to convince myself that loneliness was just another form of peace. I hadn't thought of Arjun in years. We'd been inseparable in college. Late-night drives, secret hangouts, shared dreams of moving to a bigger city together. Then life happened. He vanished after graduation. No calls, no texts. People said he'd gone abroad. Others whispered darker things, that he'd gotten into trouble, that he'd cut ties deliberately. But I remembered him as the boy with sharp eyes, a mischievous smile, and the kind of charisma that made you follow him anywhere. That evening, there was a knock on my door. It was already past 9 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, the hallway light flickered, and there he was, Arjun. He looked almost the same. Older, yes, but not in the way most of us age. His face was pale but smooth, as if time had skimmed past him without leaving scars. His hair, once wild, was neatly combed, and his clothes were dark, well-fitted, too perfect, almost like he'd stepped out of some old photograph. "Hey," he said, smiling faintly. His voice was softer than I remembered, deeper, but it carried the same familiarity that immediately pulled me back in time. "It's been a while." I stood frozen for a moment before laughing awkwardly. "Arjun? My God, it's really you?" He nodded slowly. "May I come in?" I let him inside, still trying to process the shock. He walked into my apartment like he knew it already, his eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Something about his movements felt measured, deliberate, as though he was studying everything, committing it to memory. We sat down, and I asked the usual questions. Where had he been? Why hadn't he reached out? What brought him back now? "I traveled a lot," he said vaguely. "Different countries, different people. But I thought of you often. Always meant to come back." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I guess the right time is now." He didn't elaborate further, and I didn't push. There was something unsettling in the way he spoke, as if every word was chosen with care, weighed before being released. Still, I wanted to believe this was my old friend. Loneliness does strange things. It makes you cling to familiarity, even if it feels wrong. We spent the evening catching up, though the conversation felt off. He remembered things from our past in eerie detail, more than I did. Specific nights, exact words, even the smell of rain on certain evenings. But when I asked him about the last decade of his life, he was vague, almost evasive. Finally, as midnight approached, I offered him the couch for the night. He smiled, thanked me, and accepted without hesitation. But as I went to bed, something gnawed at me. The way he had looked at my apartment. The way he hadn't blinked for long stretches. The way once or twice I thought I saw his reflection in the window move differently than he did. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like he was standing outside my bedroom door, watching. And when I finally drifted into uneasy dreams, I saw him as he used to be in college, laughing, alive, full of fire. But his eyes were hollow, and his laughter echoed like something inhuman. When I woke at dawn, the apartment was silent, but I could swear I heard someone whisper my name. The morning after Arjun stayed over, I woke with a heavy head and a sense of unease clinging to me. The whispers from the night before still echoed faintly in my ears, though I convinced myself it had been a dream. When I stepped into the living room, Arjun was already awake, sitting on the couch with his hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't watching TV, wasn't scrolling through his phone, just sitting there, perfectly still, staring at nothing. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile. He turned his head slowly, almost too slowly, and smiled back. "Good morning. You look tired." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, I didn't sleep much. Too much catching up, I guess." But he didn't respond to that. He just kept looking at me, his smile unwavering. There was something off about his eyes. I hadn't noticed it clearly the night before, but in daylight, it was impossible to ignore. His irises seemed darker than they used to be, almost black, swallowing the light. "Do you want some coffee?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Yes," he said simply, his voice calm, deliberate. As I brewed the coffee, I caught him in the corner of my eye. He hadn't moved an inch, just sitting there, watching me. I poured 2 mugs, and when I handed him his, I noticed something odd. His hands were ice cold. Not the kind of chill from air conditioning, but the deep cold that seemed to seep into your bones. "Thanks," he said, and took a sip. His face remained expressionless, but then he set the cup down without finishing it. "You still live alone?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," I said, surprised. "Why?" "Good," he replied softly, almost to himself. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Over the next few days, Arjun stayed with me, claiming he needed some time to settle back into the city. I didn't have the heart to refuse him, though unease grew heavier with each passing day. At first, it was little things. I'd wake up at odd hours and find him standing in the dark hallway, not moving, just staring at the wall. When I'd call out, he'd turn and smile like nothing was wrong. Sometimes I'd catch him muttering under his breath, words I didn't understand, in a language that sounded guttural and harsh. The moment I entered the room, he'd stop and change the subject. And then there were the mirrors. I began noticing that his reflection didn't always match his movements. Once, while brushing my teeth, I saw him behind me in the bathroom mirror. He was leaning closer, his smile stretched unnaturally wide. But when I turned around, he was just standing there, neutral-faced, as if nothing had happened. Another time, I saw him blink in the mirror while in reality, he hadn't. It wasn't just in the apartment. One evening, I took him out for dinner, hoping some fresh air and normalcy would ease the strangeness. We went to a quiet restaurant, and as we sat down, the waiter greeted us cheerfully. But the moment Arjun looked up, the waiter froze. His smile faltered, his face turned pale, and he stammered something before hurrying away. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "See what?" Arjun asked, tilting his head, his expression blank. I didn't press it, but all through dinner, I noticed people avoiding our table. Waiters hurried past. Diners kept their eyes down. It was as if they could sense something I couldn't fully grasp. Later that night, as we walked back, I tried to bring up the past again. "Why did you disappear after college, Arjun? No one knew where you went, not even your family." He stopped walking, turned to me, and said in a voice colder than the night air, "Family doesn't matter anymore. Only you do." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His eyes locked on mine, and I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like he was pulling something out of me just by looking. Then he blinked, smiled faintly, and continued walking like nothing had happened. The real breaking point came a few nights later. I woke again at 3 a.m. That hour had become a curse ever since he arrived. My apartment was dark, but I sensed movement. I stepped into the living room and froze. Arjun was standing in the center of the room, his arms stretched out, head tilted back. His mouth was moving rapidly, whispering those guttural words again. Shadows seemed to ripple around him, crawling up the walls, flickering unnaturally like living things. "Arjun," I whispered, my voice trembling. He stopped instantly and turned to me. His eyes glowed faintly, impossibly, in the dark. "Go back to bed," he said softly, but his voice was layered, like two people speaking at once. One human, one something else. I stumbled back into my room, slammed the door, and locked it. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the shadows were gone, and Arjun was sitting calmly on the couch, smiling like nothing had happened. But I knew then, this was not the Arjun I once knew. Something had returned in his place. By the end of that week, fear had become my shadow. Every corner of my apartment seemed alive with tension, and every time I looked at Arjun, I saw less of the man I once knew. I tried to convince myself that stress was making me hallucinate, that maybe I was imagining the whispers and the shifting shadows. But denial only lasted so long. The breaking point came one rainy evening. We were sitting in the living room, the storm hammering against the windows, when I decided I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Arjun," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to know the truth. Where have you been all these years?" He looked up slowly from the window. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with something unnatural. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Yes, it matters," I snapped. "You vanished for 15 years. No calls, no letters. And then you just show up at my door like nothing happened? What do you expect me to think?" His smile faded. For the first time since he'd arrived, his face went blank, cold, lifeless. "You wouldn't understand," he whispered. "Try me." The room seemed to grow colder. I could see my breath fog in the air, though the heater hummed in the corner. The shadows on the walls began to stretch unnaturally, as if reaching toward him. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't just leave. I was taken." I frowned. "Taken? By who?" He leaned forward, his voice lowering into something guttural. "Not who. What?" I stared at him, not sure if he was joking, but the intensity in his gaze made it clear. This was no joke. "They found me," he continued. "When I left college, I was lost, wandering, angry, and they offered me something, a chance to become more than human." "They?" I repeated, my skin crawling. His lips curled into a faint smile. "The ones who move in the dark, the ones who whisper between worlds. They chose me. They showed me the truth of what we are, what we could be." My chest tightened. "You sound insane, Arjun. Do you even hear yourself?" But even as I said it, I remembered the shadows that had rippled across my walls, the way his reflection moved differently, the way people avoided him in public as though they sensed something wrong. Insane didn't explain any of that. "You see it, don't you?" he said, eyes glinting. "You felt it, the air thickening when I enter a room, the whispers at night. You know it's real." I shook my head, backing away. "Why are you here, Arjun? Why me?" His expression softened then, almost tender. "Because you're the only one who ever mattered. When they gave me the choice, I thought of you. You kept me human." A chill ran down my spine. "What choice?" His smile widened, and for the first time, I saw his teeth. They were sharper than they should have been. Too sharp. "To return. To take what I want." My heart thundered in my chest. "Take what?" "You." The storm outside roared louder, the windows rattling violently as if struck by unseen hands. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. In the faint glow of the lightning outside, I saw him rise to his feet. His body seemed taller than before, stretched unnaturally, his shadow crawling across the walls like some grotesque creature. His eyes burned faintly red in the dark, glowing like embers. "I waited years," he said. his voice no longer entirely his own. It carried a second tone, something deep and monstrous. "I returned for you, to share this with you, to make you mine." My stomach twisted in terror. "You're not Arjun," I whispered. "I am," he hissed, stepping closer. "And I'm not. I am more, and soon you will be too." I stumbled back toward my bedroom, heart hammering, but the shadows on the walls moved before I did, curling like smoke, blocking my path. "You can't run from me," his voice echoed. "You never could. Even back then, you followed me everywhere, remember? Now you'll follow me into the dark." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a fraction of a second. His skin seemed to ripple, his features twisting into something inhuman, as if something beneath his flesh was struggling to break free. I screamed, grabbing the nearest thing I could, a lamp, and hurled it at him. It crashed against his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He only laughed, a sound that shook me to my bones. "Fight if you want," he said, his voice vibrating with unholy resonance. "It makes no difference. You were chosen long ago." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He hadn't come back to reconnect. He hadn't come back out of nostalgia. He had come back to claim me. My apartment felt like it was shrinking. The walls pressed inward, shadows crawling over them like living things. The air grew heavy, every breath jagged, painful. Arjun, or whatever he had become, loomed in the center of the room, his figure stretched by the lightning flashes outside. His face flickered between human and something else, skin rippling, eyes glowing like hot coals buried in ash. "You don't have to fear," he said, voice carrying that layered, monstrous echo. "You only have to accept." "Stay away from me," I choked out, stumbling backward. The shadows obeyed him like living chains, creeping along the floor, rising around me in tendrils. My legs froze as if invisible hands had grabbed them. I tried to move, but it felt like I was sinking into the floor. Arjun stepped closer, his movements unnaturally smooth. I gave myself to them so I could come back. "For you. You'll understand once you let go. Once you're with me, you'll never be alone again. You're not my friend." I spat, panic turning into rage. "You're a monster." For a moment, his expression flickered, hurt, almost human again. But then his mouth split into a grin too wide for his face. "A monster who never forgot you." I fought against the shadows, reaching desperately for anything to defend myself. My fingers brushed against a framed photo on the shelf. One of me and Arjun, back in college, smiling at some festival. I grabbed it and hurled it at him. The glass shattered across his chest. To my shock, he hissed, an inhuman, guttural sound that reverberated through the walls. The shadows recoiled slightly. For the first time, I realized the thing inside him hated who he had been. Memories, humanity, love. I scrambled to the bookshelf and yanked down every photo, every old journal, every fragment of our past I still had. "This is who you were," I shouted, holding up the pieces. "Not this thing. This isn't you." Arjun's face twisted, his eyes burning brighter. The shadows surged again, trying to snatch the objects from my hands. But each time they touched a photo, they recoiled like smoke against flame. "Stop!" he screamed, voice splitting into 2, 3 tones at once. His skin rippled violently, his form flickering between the friend I remembered and the horror he had become. I stepped forward, shoving the memories toward him. "You left me, Arjun. You disappeared. But you don't get to come back like this. You don't get to drag me into whatever hell you chose." His body convulsed, the shadows writhing wildly, the storm outside peaking in a deafening roar. Windows shattered, glass raining onto the floor, wind howling through the apartment. And then, for a heartbeat, I saw him. The real Arjun, his eyes, human again, glistening with something like sorrow. "I didn't want this," he whispered. I just didn't want to be forgotten. Lightning split the sky, and the thing inside him shrieked. A howl that shook the building. His body twisted one last time, and then everything exploded in darkness. I don't remember falling. When I opened my eyes, the storm was gone. My apartment was a wreck, broken glass, overturned furniture, scorch marks crawling up the walls. But Arjun was gone. No body, no shadow, no trace of him ever having been there. Only the photograph lay on the floor, cracked but intact. In it, the two of us still smiled, frozen in time. But something was different. Arjun's eyes in the picture were no longer the same. They were darker, watching, waiting. It's been months since that night. I moved to a different city, left everything behind. But sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I catch a glimpse of him standing behind me. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m. and hear his whisper, "You're not alone, never alone." I've stopped keeping photographs. I've stopped keeping friends. Because now I know, once you let someone in, truly in, they never leave. Not even after death. And Arjun is still with me, watching, waiting.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
I was 29 when Ethan Price came back into my life. Most people would have walked right past him, just another stranger standing at a coffee shop, a face you'd never remember. But to me, he wasn't a stranger. He was the shadow of my childhood, the friend who once knew everything about me, the one person I thought I'd never see again. We grew up in the same small town in Pennsylvania. Back then, life was simple. Playing baseball in the cul-de-sac until the streetlights came on, sneaking into the woods behind the old mill, daring each other to knock on the door of the boarded-up farmhouse at the edge of town. Ethan was my partner in everything, the kind of friend people said you carried for life. If I was around, he was right there with me. But somewhere in high school, things changed. He became distant, quieter. His jokes turned into strange, unsettling remarks. Teachers whispered about his temper, and kids told rumors about him torturing animals behind his parents' garage. I never knew how much of it was true, but the unease between us grew like a wall. Eventually, we stopped hanging out. Then, one summer, he was gone. His family packed up in the middle of the night and left town. No goodbyes, no explanation. It was like he'd been erased from my life. Until last month. It was late evening, and I had just left work in downtown Pittsburgh. I stopped at a corner coffee shop for a quick drink, scrolling through my phone. When I felt it, that prickling sensation that someone was watching me. And there he was, standing across the street under the dull glow of a flickering streetlight, a paper coffee cup in his hand. His hair was longer now, his face leaner, almost gaunt. But his eyes, those dark, sharp eyes, hadn't changed at all. "Mark," he said when I finally crossed over, his voice carrying too easily through the traffic noise. "It's been a long time." My stomach tightened. It had been over a decade since I'd even thought about him, but hearing him say my name like that brought everything back in a rush. "Ethan?" I asked. He smiled slowly, like a predator recognizing its prey. "You remember?" We talked for a few minutes, awkward small talk. He asked about my job, whether I still lived in the same apartment near Oakland. When I told him yes, his smile grew wider, too wide. Before we parted, he gripped my shoulder firmly, his hand cold, and said, "We should catch up properly. I'll come by soon." The words should have felt casual, like any old friend trying to reconnect. But they didn't. All night, even after I got home and locked the door behind me, those words echoed in my head. "I'll come by soon." And I couldn't explain why, but the thought made me feel cold. For 3 days after our chance meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan would show up at my door. Every creak in the apartment, every knock on the hallway wall made me flinch. I kept reminding myself that it was just an old friend, nothing more. But deep down, I knew there was something wrong. And then, on the fourth night, he came. I was watching TV when I heard the buzz of the intercom downstairs. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I pressed the button, his voice came through, low and oddly calm. "It's Ethan. Thought I'd drop by." For a long moment, I just stood there, finger hovering over the lock release. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but something in his tone, something that felt like an order, not a request, made me buzz him in. A few minutes later, he was at my door. He looked the same as he had that night at the coffee shop, except more disheveled. His hair hung in his face, and his clothes looked rumpled, like he hadn't changed in days. He walked right in without waiting for me to invite him, eyes scanning the apartment, like he was memorizing every corner. "Nice place," he said, though his voice dripped with sarcasm. "You always did like your little comforts." I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, well, I work hard for it." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He sat on the couch and leaned back like he owned the place, eyes following me as I moved around the room. For a while, we tried to catch up. I told him about my job at the insurance firm, the long hours, the grind. He barely responded. When I asked about him, his answers were vague, almost deliberately evasive. "I've been around," he said, sipping the beer I offered him. "Different places, different people. Learned a lot about what really matters." "And what's that?" I asked. He looked at me with a strange intensity. "Survival, strength, knowing who your real friends are." The way he said it made my skin crawl. The next time he came over, it was unannounced again. I found him waiting outside my building when I got back from work. Leaning against the railing, eyes fixed on my window. "I thought we could hang out," he said casually, though the way he was standing there felt anything but casual. That night, he told me stories about the people he'd met since leaving town. But the stories weren't normal. They were violent, unsettling. Fights that ended with people in the hospital. Nights in the woods where things watched from the tree line. Strange rituals he said he'd witnessed. People chanting, firelight flickering on their faces. I laughed nervously, assuming he was exaggerating, maybe even lying. But he didn't laugh with me. He just stared, waiting for me to react. "Do you ever think about death?" he asked suddenly. The question hit me like a slap. Not really." "You should," he said, leaning forward, his eyes glinting. "Most people live their lives pretending it won't happen, but it's always there, waiting, right behind you." I swallowed hard, trying to change the subject, but he wouldn't let it go. When he finally left that night, I double-locked the door and sat in silence, staring at the floor. Ethan had always been a little strange, sure, but this wasn't strangeness. This was something darker. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure if Ethan had come back to rekindle our friendship. It felt more like he'd come back for me. After that night, I started noticing things I couldn't explain. Small details at first, shadows in my apartment moving against the light. The faint sound of footsteps behind me when I was alone. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the stress getting to me. But then Ethan began appearing at odd hours, uninvited, always watching, always smiling. One night, I woke to the sound of tapping at my window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I live in a brick building, so it would have been impossible for anyone to reach it without a ladder. I froze. Slowly, I pulled the curtains aside, and there he was, standing outside, holding a small dark bundle in his arms. "Ethan," I shouted, heart pounding. "What the hell are you doing?" He smiled, lifting the bundle, a black cloth wrapped around something small. "Just making sure I'm not forgotten," he said softly. I brought a little reminder. Before I could react, he was gone, just like that, disappearing into the darkness below, That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in the living room, shaking, listening to every creak and groan of the old building. Something about Ethan had changed. He wasn't the same boy I'd known. He was something else, something I couldn't understand. The next few days blurred together. He'd show up at my office, just standing outside the glass doors, watching me from across the street. Sometimes, I'd get strange texts from unknown numbers, pictures of me leaving work, entering my apartment, standing in my kitchen, always unsigned. And then the nightmare started. At first, they were small, just dreams of Ethan standing in the shadows, watching me from corners of dark rooms. But soon, they grew more vivid, more terrifying. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around me, feeling hands on my shoulders that weren't there. I'd hear his voice whispering my name from the hallway, from behind locked doors, from places I knew were empty. One night, I dreamt he was in my apartment, crouched over me as I slept. His eyes were black, hollow, and he whispered, "You don't belong to anyone else." I woke screaming, my apartment dark and silent, or so I thought. When I got to the living room, a single photograph of the two of us as kids had been moved. It lay face down on the floor, ripped at the edges. I hadn't touched it. I called the police. They came, checked the apartment, found no signs of forced entry. "Maybe it's just stress," the officer said kindly, shaking his head. "People under pressure, sometimes these things happen." But I knew better. Ethan wanted me dead. I tried to confront him the next day when he came to my door, casually, smiling that same unsettling grin. "Ethan, what do you want from me?" I demanded. He tilted his head, almost innocent. "Isn't it obvious?" he said softly. "I want what's mine." Panic gripped me. "I'm not yours. Leave me alone." "Not leave," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Take, keep. You'll see, we're meant to be together." That night, I stayed awake with knives around me, every sound magnified. Around 2 a.m., I heard the door click. It hadn't been unlocked. Footsteps crept closer. I held my breath, heart hammering. The lights flickered and went out. Then I felt him, standing at the edge of the bed, his cold fingers brushing my arm. I screamed, swinging wildly, but my hands passed through. Nothing. He laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "You can't stop me," he whispered. "You never could." In a desperate panic, I bolted from my apartment and ran down the fire escape, tumbling into the alley below. The streetlights flickered above, but I saw him there, at the top of the stairwell, smiling down at me. Not climbing, not moving, just appearing. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out near the park, gasping, praying I wasn't being followed. When I got back home the next morning, my apartment was pristine. Nothing out of place, nothing missing. Only a note on my kitchen counter. "Soon, Mark, you belong to me." I realized then that Ethan wasn't just obsessed. He was dangerous, relentless, and perhaps no longer entirely human. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that I could not escape him. I barely slept that night. I barricaded my apartment door with chairs and a metal coat rack, stacked my knives on the table beside the bed, and sat in the corner, waiting for him. And sure enough, around 2:17 a.m., I heard it, the soft click of the door latch, followed by a deliberate, slow creak as the door swung open. I froze, heart hammering. The darkness seemed to thicken in the apartment, pressing down like a living thing. Then I felt it, a presence, a cold, suffocating weight at the edge of my vision. "Mark," Ethan's voice hissed from the darkness. "Why do you run? You know it's useless." I scrambled to my feet, knives in hand. "Stay back, I mean it." From the shadows, he emerged, not entirely human. His skin was pale, almost gray, veins black like ink crawling across his arms. His eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light. He smiled, and it wasn't the familiar grin I remembered from childhood. This was something wrong, something that made my stomach turn. "I only want you," he said softly, stepping closer. "You've always been mine." I swung a knife at him, but it passed through air. He didn't flinch. He moved faster than I could track, closing the distance with supernatural ease. I backed toward the window, fumbling with the lock, praying I could escape. Ethan advanced, and with every step, the air grew colder, heavier. Shadows slithered along the walls, crawling toward me, writhing like living snakes. "You can't escape me, Mark," he whispered. "You were never meant to." Panic surged. I grabbed the fire extinguisher next to the window and swung it with everything I had. It hit him squarely in the chest, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. But it didn't last. His form twisted grotesquely, bones cracking audibly as he let out a guttural scream. The shadows surged around him, forming shapes, faces, screaming mouths, clawed hands, all writhing in agony and delight at my fear. I stumbled backward, falling across the floor, knife still in hand. Then he lunged. I screamed and stabbed blindly. The knife sank deep into something, a sickening wet sound filling the room. Ethan let out a roar, a sound that was half human, half beast, and flew back into the corner, convulsing. I took the chance. I ran. Through the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the street. The night air hit me like a wave, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear him laughing, his voice echoing through the building, impossibly fast, impossibly near. I ran until I reached the police station, pounding on the doors until they opened. Breathless, I tried to explain. But how do you explain something that sounds insane? The officers were patient at first, until I turned and there he was, Ethan, standing at the edge of the parking lot, smiling at me. "Mark," he called softly, "it's not over." I blinked, and he was gone. They searched the area, scoured the building, but there was no sign of him. No footprints, no trace, nothing. The officers told me to go home, stay somewhere safe, maybe see a doctor if I was having stress reactions. I nodded numbly, but I knew better. Ethan was still out there, and he would come back. Since that night, I've moved 3 times. I don't stay anywhere for long. Every creak, every shadow, every flicker of light makes my heart race. I don't answer unknown numbers. I never leave my apartment alone. Sometimes I wake up and swear I hear him whispering my name. Sometimes I see his face in reflections, on the glass of the subway doors, in the chrome of parked cars, in the darkness of my own apartment. And I know the truth. No matter how far I run, no matter where I hide, Ethan Price will never stop. Because he's not just my old friend anymore. He's something else, and he wants me dead.
If you thought that story was scary, wait until you hear this next one.
I hadn't thought about high school in years, and honestly, I was glad. My teenage years were awkward, filled with insecurities and forgotten dreams. But that was life. I had moved on. I had a job now, friends in the city, and a life I was building far away from the old hallways and classrooms of my past. Then I got the message. It came on WhatsApp from Ryan, my old best friend in high school. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. The message read simply, "Hey Mark, it's been forever. Our 10th class reunion is happening tonight. You have to come. It won't be the same without you." There was a location, a hall in our hometown, a place I remembered from the old days, the community center where we had once celebrated school functions and fairs. A wave of nostalgia hit me, and despite my better judgment, I decided to go. I thought it would be harmless, a trip down memory lane. By the time I left the city and drove into my hometown, the sun was setting, painting the small streets in shades of orange and crimson. Everything looked smaller, quieter, more deserted than I remembered. There were empty shops, shuttered windows, and the faint smell of damp leaves in the air. Still, I told myself it was just the passage of time. I parked outside the community center. My heart beat faster. Excitement mixed with curiosity. What would my old classmates look like after 10 years? Who would be there? And where was Ryan? I stepped inside the hall. Empty. Completely empty. The chairs were arranged in rows, as if waiting for an audience that had never arrived. Tables had leftover decorations, dusty and faded, cobwebs clinging to corners. My voice echoed as I called out, "Ryan?" No answer. A chill ran down my spine. I tried calling his number, straight to voicemail. I sent a text. No reply. I laughed nervously, telling myself he was probably joking. Maybe the other classmates hadn't shown up yet. Maybe I was just early. I wandered through the hall, peering into the classrooms attached to the center. Everything was silent, abandoned. Not a single sign of life. No old friends, no familiar faces. Only shadows stretching across the peeling walls. That's when I noticed it. On one of the walls, written in what looked like chalk or my initials, MK. I frowned. My heart thumped harder. I hadn't written that. Nobody else should have. And the handwriting, it looked old, but somehow fresh. Like someone had just done it. A low noise echoed behind me, like the scraping of a chair across the floor. I spun around. Nothing. I decided to leave, but as I reached the door, slowly I approached. The stage lights were dimly lit, though no one had turned them on. Then I saw him, Ryan, or someone who looked like him. He sat on a chair at the center of the stage, head tilted, smiling. His features were distorted in some impossible way. Eyes too dark, lips stretched just slightly too wide. He didn't move when I stepped closer, only watched me, breathing in sync with some rhythm I couldn't hear. "Ryan?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just smiled. And then he stood up. His movements were jerky, unnatural, almost like he was puppet-like. He walked toward me without a sound. The stage lights flickered. Shadows danced across the walls. I realized then that this was no normal reunion. This hall, this place, even Ryan. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. I turned to run toward the back door, but it wasn't there. Where it should have been, a wall now rose, solid and unyielding. Panic gripped me. I ran back to the main hall. The chairs were rearranging themselves, forming a circle. The decorations on the table shifted, moving like liquid. And then I heard whispers, hundreds of them, murmuring my name, calling me to join them. The shadows started moving closer, curling like fingers across the floor. The chalk writing on the wall changed, words forming themselves. "Welcome back, Mark. We've missed you." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the hall into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, trying to use the flashlight, but even that seemed dimmer than it should have been. Then I felt him behind me, Ryan's hand, cold as ice, resting on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. And yet, I could feel eyes on me, from everywhere, from the shadows, the corners, even the ceiling. A voice whispered into my ear, chillingly familiar. "You came alone. Perfect." I ran toward the stage, desperate to get out, but the floorboards beneath me creaked unnaturally, bending like they were alive. Chairs rose into the air, spinning slowly, circling me. Tables floated. Decorations writhed like snakes. And Ryan? He was everywhere at once. I saw him in the corner, in the shadows, reflected in the mirrors on the walls, smiling that same horrifying grin. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice now multiple, layered. I've waited a long time." Memories of high school flashed in my mind. The pranks, the secrets we shared, the fights we had. I remembered how sometimes, when no one else was looking, Ryan's smile had made me uneasy. I had brushed it off then. I should have never done that. The whispers grew louder. Hundreds of voices, all overlapping, all chanting my name, all laughing. I realized then that this was never about a reunion. It was a trap. Ryan had invited me here not to see old friends, but to see me. Alone. Vulnerable. And now I was his plaything. The walls seemed to close in. The ceiling stretched impossibly high. Shadows crawled up my legs, biting, freezing, holding me in place. Ryan walked toward me, every step deliberate, the air thick and suffocating. I fought to break free, throwing myself at the doors, smashing the glass, screaming into the empty hall. But the exit wasn't real. It led me in circles, always back to the center of the room, to him. I grabbed a chair and swung it at the shadow nearest me. It passed through like smoke, only to reappear seconds later. I realized then, whatever had taken over this place, it wasn't human. Ryan wasn't human, or at least not anymore. I ran to the stage, scrambling up onto it, desperate. Ryan followed, moving impossibly fast, his grin wider, his eyes glowing faint red. I stumbled backward and fell into the pit beneath the stage. The wood creaked and cracked. The whispers turned into screams. Hundreds of faces appeared in the walls, classmates I recognized and some I didn't, twisted, broken, all reaching for me. I realized with horror that they were all trapped here, like me, caught by Ryan's power, made into shadows of what they had been. I felt cold hands wrap around my ankles. I kicked, screamed, and clawed at the floor. Then, just as Ryan's face appeared above me, smiling in triumph, a loud crash shook the building. A voice, unknown, strong, shouted something, and suddenly the shadows recoiled. Ryan hissed, recoiling, and in a flash of blinding light, everything went black. When I woke, I was lying outside the community hall, dawn breaking over the small town. The building looked normal again. The doors were intact. No shadows, no whispers, no Ryan. I ran home, never looking back. But I know he's still there. Somewhere in the dark corners of that town, Ryan waits, and the next time he sends an invitation, I might not be so lucky. I was 28 when I first saw him again. His name was Logan, and we had been inseparable in high school. Best friends, people would say. We shared everything: lunches, secrets, pranks, late-night dares, and a bond that felt unbreakable. Logan had this wild streak, a fearless confidence that drew people toward him. I, on the other hand, was quieter, more cautious. But with him, I felt invincible. We grew up in a small suburban town in Ohio. Summers were spent riding our bikes through empty streets, jumping into the river behind the old mill, and exploring abandoned houses on the outskirts of town. Logan always dared me into trouble, and I always followed. I trusted him with my life. Then one day, without warning, he disappeared. His family moved suddenly, leaving town in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no explanation. The void he left behind was more than just absence. It was a kind of emptiness that haunted my teenage years. I tried to move on. I went to college, started working, and made new friends. But Logan was always there, in the back of my mind, a ghost from my past that I could never shake. And then came the message. "Hey Alex, it's Logan. Long time no see. I'm back in town. Come over tonight. I have something important to show you." It was simple, direct, and oddly compelling. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Something about the message unsettled me, yet drew me in. I arrived at his old neighborhood as twilight descended. The streets had changed little in appearance, but there was a strange stillness, too quiet for a suburban area. I parked near the house Logan had grown up in. It looked abandoned, the paint peeling, windows dark. but the lights inside flickered briefly as I walked closer. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I called his name softly. "Logan, are you here?" A door creaked open slowly. The house smelled of damp wood and old smoke. The shadows inside seemed to stretch toward me. I stepped in cautiously. The living room was empty. Chairs were overturned, dust covering every surface. A faint whisper, like a sigh, echoed through the hall. I froze. "Logan?" I called again, louder. Then I heard it. A soft, low laughter, coming from upstairs. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. This wasn't the playful Logan I remembered. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. At the top, the hallway stretched unnaturally long, darker than it should have been. At the far end, I saw him. Logan. But not quite. His eyes seemed hollow, his grin wider than memory allowed, and he stood perfectly still, staring at me. "Alex," he said in a voice that was familiar, yet distorted. "You came." I swallowed, uneasy. What's going on?" He tilted his head. "Come, I want to show you something. Something only you can see." He led me into the basement. The air grew colder with each step. The basement smelled of mildew and rot. Shadows twisted along the walls as we descended. There was a faint humming noise, almost melodic, like a lullaby sung off-key. In the center of the basement, a circle was drawn on the floor with chalk, strange symbols I didn't recognize. Candles flickered around it, though the windows were closed. In the middle of the circle was a small wooden box, carved with designs that seemed to move if you stared long enough. Logan knelt beside it and opened it. Inside was a photograph of me, taken without my knowledge, dating back to my childhood, then my teen years, and even recent months. Every significant moment of my life was documented, perfectly preserved. How did you get these?" I stammered. Logan smiled. "I've been watching, always watching. You were always mine, Alex. And now, you're here." A chill ran down my spine. "Watching me? That's insane. You can't just—" "Shh," he said, raising a finger. "Not yet. Watch." He began whispering words I didn't understand. The air vibrated around me. The shadows grew longer, thicker, moving along the walls and floor as if alive. I could hear faint whispers calling my name from every corner. I tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. The room plunged into darkness, except for the candlelight around the circle. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. Logan's figure was no longer entirely human. It was stretched, warped, and shadows seemed to crawl over him like living tattoos. "Alex, join me," he whispered. "See what I can show you. See what we can be, together." I shook my head, backing away. "No, this is insane. Let me out." But the symbols on the floor glowed faintly. I felt invisible hands gripping my ankles, pulling me forward. I screamed and kicked, but my feet were stuck. The shadows grew, curling around me, whispering, laughing. I realized then that Logan had not come back as a person. He had changed into something else, something that thrived on fear, control, and obsession. Memories of high school flickered in my mind. The times he had been unusually intense, too controlling. The way he'd stare when others laughed at my jokes. The way his grin would twist when I refused a dare. I had laughed it off then. I should have never done that. He stepped closer, his form now grotesque, elongated. Shadows writhed from his body, stretching along the floor, walls, and ceiling. The whispers intensified. Every step he took made the air colder, heavier. "You can't leave," he said. "You're mine, always mine." I fought against the unseen hands, tried to pull free. Candles flickered and went out. The basement was pitch black. I could feel him move around me, circling, enjoying my terror. A memory from our childhood came to me. One dare too far, one that ended with me nearly falling into the river. Logan had laughed as I screamed. That same cruel delight was here, magnified, twisted into something monstrous. I realized then that I had to fight, not just physically, but mentally. I had to refuse to be his, to deny him the control he had been building for over a decade. I remembered the old attic hatch we used to play in as kids. Perhaps it led outside. I ran blindly, praying. The shadows clawed at my clothes, dragging at me. Logan's voice laughed behind me, layered and unnatural. I reached the hatch, pushing with every ounce of strength. It gave way. I tumbled outside into the night. The air hit my face, normal, real. I didn't stop running. Streets, alleyways, the woods. I ran until my lungs burned. When I finally looked back, the house looked ordinary. No shadows, no lights, no signs of anything supernatural. But I knew better. I knew what had been inside. I never returned. I left the town behind, moved far away, changed my phone number, my routines, everything. But I still feel him sometimes. The way a shadow falls wrong, the faint echo of laughter in the wind. I know one day he might find me again. And when he does, I might not be so lucky.
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
I was 24 when I landed my first real job. Fresh out of college, armed with a cheap suit and a nervous smile, I joined a mid-sized logistics company in Chicago. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of being an adult for the first time. That was also where I met Daniel Carter. Daniel was a little older than me, maybe 27 at the time. Tall, lean, and always a little too sharply dressed for our drab office. He had a way of making everything feel like an inside joke. Meetings, deadlines, even dull inventory spreadsheets. He'd crack a smile or tell some sly story, and you'd be laughing with him before you realized you'd given up your lunch break. We became friends almost instantly. We'd sneak out for late coffee runs, swap music, complain about the bosses. He had that sort of magnetic confidence you wanted to orbit. But there were strange things about him too. He never spoke about his past. Not really. He had no social media, no pictures of family, no stories about childhood. Sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window at nothing, lips moving faintly, like he was whispering to someone I couldn't see. When I asked him about it once, he grinned and said, "Just practicing, for later." I didn't push. We were young. People had their quirks. Then, one Monday, Daniel didn't show up for work. No call, no text, no warning. The HR department said he'd resigned. Just like that. His desk was empty by Tuesday morning. His number was disconnected. No one seemed to know where he'd gone. For a while, I checked, called old contacts, Googled his name. Nothing. He'd simply disappeared. Eventually, life moved on. I got promoted, changed apartments, dated, broke up, lived. Daniel faded into a strange footnote in my early adulthood. Until last week, a block number called me just after midnight. When I answered, a voice I hadn't heard in 7 years whispered, "Alex, it's Daniel. We need to meet." My stomach dropped. "Daniel, where have you been?" He chuckled softly, the same low chuckle I remembered. Not on the phone, in person. "Tomorrow night, 9 p.m., the old rail yard, near Union Station. Don't tell anyone, please." And then the line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, heart hammering. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. I should have deleted the call, forgotten it. But instead, like a moth drawn to a flame, I went. The rail yard at night was a skeleton of steel and rust. Old train cars sat like tombstones in rows, graffiti peeling from their sides. A mist clung low to the gravel, curling around my ankles as I walked. I kept telling myself I shouldn't be here, that it was dangerous, that people don't vanish for 7 years and reappear asking to meet you in places like this without a reason. But something in Daniel's voice, a tremor of desperation maybe, compelled me forward. I saw him standing near a derelict boxcar, hands in the pockets of a long coat. For a moment, my heart lifted. He looked almost the same, just thinner, his face paler, cheekbones sharper. But his eyes were darker than I remembered, sunken, like he hadn't slept in years. "Daniel," I said, my voice echoing against the empty tracks. He smiled faintly. "Alex, you came." We stood there, two ghosts of our former selves, surrounded by the rattle of distant trains. "Where have you been?" I asked. His smile twitched. "Everywhere. Nowhere. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's starting again." "What is?" He stepped closer. The smell of damp iron and something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers, drifted off him. "Do you ever dream of me, Alex?" A chill ran through me. "What?" Tilted his head. "Never mind. You came. That's good. I was hoping." He trailed off, looking over his shoulder, as if something was following him. "We don't have long. They'll be here soon." "Who?" He grabbed my wrist suddenly, his grip like ice. "When it starts, don't look at their faces. Promise me." "What the hell are you talking about?" I tried to pull free. Then I heard it, a faint humming, low and mechanical, but not from any train. It vibrated through the rails, up into my bones. Daniel's eyes widened. "It's too late," he whispered. Shapes began moving in the mist beyond the tracks. At first, I thought they were people, commuters, maybe, or late-night workers. But their movements were wrong. Too jerky, too fast, as if each step was several frames cut from a film. Daniel squeezed my wrist harder. "Don't look at their faces." The shapes drew closer. The humming grew louder, like 100 tuning forks vibrating at once. I turned my head anyway. What I saw wasn't human. Faces that weren't faces at all, but smooth skin stretched over skulls, with black holes where eyes should be. Their mouths were too wide, lined with teeth that clicked softly as they moved. Their clothes, if you could call them that, hung like wet paper, fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel stepped in front of me. "He's mine," he said, voice trembling. "You can't have him." The things stopped. One tilted its head. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out like a train braking on rusted tracks, long, screeching, metallic. Daniel shoved me backward. "Run, Alex!" I stumbled, but he didn't move. He raised his arms, muttering something under his breath. The symbols etched into the rails around him began to glow faintly, shapes I couldn't comprehend, twisting like living runes. The creatures advanced. Daniel screamed, not in pain, but in effort, and a ring of light burst outward, forcing them back. "Go!" he shouted again. I ran. I don't know how far or for how long. The mist closed in, the humming echoing behind me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. When I finally looked back, Daniel was gone. The mist was empty, the rail yard silent. I made it back to my apartment just before dawn, shaking. My clothes smelled of iron and that sweet rot. My phone had no record of the call, no unknown number, no message. For days I tried to rationalize it. Stress, hallucination, some elaborate prank. But at night, I'd wake to the sound of humming in the walls, faint and low. My reflection would lag in the mirror, smiling a fraction of a second after I did. And then, 2 nights ago, I got another call. This time, the voice wasn't Daniel's. It was something else. "Alex," it whispered. "He failed. Now it's your turn." I dropped the phone. When I picked it up again, the screen was blank. But my voicemail held a new message, just one. It was Daniel's voice, ragged, desperate. "I'm sorry. I tried. Don't meep him. Don't answer again. Then a metallic screech. Then silence. I haven't slept since. The humming is louder now. Shadows flicker at the edges of my apartment. Sometimes I see a shape in the hallway. Tall, thin, head tilted, waiting. I don't know if Daniel is alive or dead, or what he became in those 7 years. But I do know this. When the phone rings again, I don't think I'll be able to stop myself from answering. And that's exactly what they want.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
I hadn't thought about Evan in years. We were inseparable in high school, best friends, partners in crime, and at times, perfect foils for each other. While Alex, was careful, reserved, Evan was reckless, daring, and frighteningly persuasive. He had a way of convincing you to do things that at the time seemed harmless, but looking back, I realize how dangerous they were. After graduation, we lost touch. College, jobs, distance, life had a way of pulling us apart. I told myself I was fine, that I had moved on. But sometimes late at night, I would remember him. The laugh that could fill a room, the mischievous glint in his eyes, the feeling that with Evan, nothing was ordinary. Then the message arrived. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Alex, it's been too long. Come see me tonight. You know where. No signature, no explanation. I felt a jolt of recognition immediately. The handwriting, or the way the words were phrased. It could only be him. I hesitated. My rational mind told me to ignore it, to delete the message, to never respond. But curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I replied, "I'll come." The location was an abandoned farmhouse outside town, the place we used to explore as kids, the place that had felt exciting and terrifying in equal measure. The drive there was long, dark, the kind of night when the wind seems to whisper secrets and the trees sway with intent. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Part of me wanted to turn back. Part of me couldn't. By the time I reached the farmhouse, the moon was hidden behind clouds. The house looked worse than I remembered. Broken windows, sagging roof, paint peeled and chipped, the garden overrun with weeds. And yet there was a light flickering faintly in the upstairs window. I parked and approached cautiously. Each step on the gravel felt louder than it should, echoing in the empty night. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "Come upstairs. Don't be afraid. I'm waiting." I swallowed, the pit in my stomach growing. I should have left. I didn't. The stairs to the second floor groaned under my weight. Dust rose in motes around me, floating in the faint glow of a single candle in the hallway. Evan was there, but he wasn't the same boy I had known. His skin was pale, almost gray, his eyes unnervingly bright in the dim light. He smiled at me, wide and slow, and my stomach dropped. There was something off, something impossibly wrong about the way he stood. "Alex," he said softly, "you came." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. "Evan, what happened? Where have you been?" His gaze didn't waver. "I've been waiting. For you. For this moment." I swallowed hard, unease curling in my chest. "Waiting for what?" He gestured to a room down the hallway. "Come, I want to show you something you'll never forget." The room was empty except for a circle drawn on the floor, strange symbols etched into the wood. Candles flickered around it, and the air smelled faintly of sulfur and decay. My heart hammered in my chest. "You remember when we used to dare each other to do things we shouldn't?" Evan whispered. "This is the final dare." "Evan, I don't understand," I stammered. He smiled, and for the first time, I realized the smile wasn't human. The corners of his mouth stretched slightly too far. The shadows in his eyes darkened unnaturally, and I felt a wave of nausea and fear. Before I could move, the candles flickered violently. Shadows rose from the corners of the room, twisting and crawling along the walls like living smoke. I tried to back away, but the floor seemed to stretch beneath my feet. Evan began chanting in a language I didn't understand. His voice layered, echoing unnaturally around the room. The air vibrated with a frequency that made my teeth ache. The shadows lunged. Shapes formed. Faces of people I recognized. Classmates, neighbors, friends. All twisted, distorted, silent screams frozen on their features. They reached for me. I screamed and ran toward the door, but it slammed shut, trapping me inside. Evan was in the center, eyes glowing faint red, chanting faster, smiling wider. The symbols on the floor began to glow. I could feel the energy in the air, thick, oppressive, like it was trying to crush me. My body shook, but I forced myself to focus. I couldn't just give in. I grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at Evan. It passed through him, ghost-like, and yet the shadows screamed in response. 1,000 voices overlapping, shrill, echoing. I felt invisible hands gripping my ankles, my arms, pulling me toward the circle. Evan laughed, not his laugh, but something monstrous, layered and guttural. "You always were the cautious one," he hissed. "But now you'll learn." I struggled with every ounce of strength, kicking and clawing at the floor. My mind raced for a way out, and then I remembered something from our childhood. The attic hatch, the one we used to hide in when the thunderstorm scared us. With a surge of desperate courage, I broke free from the invisible hands and ran toward the hatch. Shadows lunged, reaching, grasping. But I made it just in time. I pulled myself into the cramped space. Darkness enveloped me. I could hear Evan's chanting continuing below, the distorted voices of the shadows growing more furious. I climbed, hoping it would lead me to the roof. When I burst through the attic hatch, the night air hit me like ice. I didn't stop to look back. I ran across the roof, leapt to the side yard, stumbled into the overgrown grass, and ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. By dawn, I had made it to the nearest road. A car passed, headlights slicing through the mist. I waved frantically. They stopped, and I scrambled in, gasping out incoherent sentences. They didn't understand. How could they? When I returned the next day with the police, the farmhouse was empty, ordinary, abandoned as if nothing had happened. The floorboards were unbroken, the attic hatch closed. There were no symbols, no shadows, no traces of Evan. Only the faint smell of decay lingered. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, hallucinations. But at night, the memories returned. The chanting, the shadows, Evan's eyes glowing red. I would wake in the dark, my bedroom shadows moving unnaturally. Whispers would fill the walls, calling my name. I never saw him again, not physically, but I know he's out there, somewhere between the living and the dead, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting for the next dare. And sometimes, when I answer my phone at night, I swear I can hear his voice, soft, low, and all too familiar. "Alex, it's time."